Family, I'm confused. I'm really confused. All this talk about black and white or black fatigue and how tired white people are of black people. But here's the thing. It seems like I don't hear a lot of white people. I mean, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of white people saying that, they have black fatigue. And they probably don't use that terminology, but they probably say it in so many words. It's not, I know there are people doing it, but what do we get mostly? We get a bunch of black people speaking about black fatigue. You know what I mean? And like I always say, we are never solution oriented. All we do is point fingers and complain. That's all we do, Finally, my confusion comes from this right here. I view myself as someone who is not ahead of the curve, not trying to get ahead of the curve, not trying to stay ahead of the curve, but trying to catch up to the curve, so to speak. So I'm always searching, and I'm always having my mind twisted and bent by something. You know what I mean? Something will lead me this way, and then something else will lead me in a different direction on the same subject, But enough of that. Here's my confusion, family, with this world. So, y'all remember back in the 90s, or y'all remember when the clips from the 90s started coming up around the Biden elections about how Joe Biden was talking about how they're going to lock up black people because he was afraid it's going to mug his uncle or do something to his grandmother or some old mess like that. All right. I didn't care anything about that when he said that. For me, the most important thing I took away from that was him saying, yes, I know we did this to them, but they're going to have to straighten up or we're going to lock them up. Hold up. Y'all did this to us. Or, in my opinion, that there's a person, entity, or group that could be held directly responsible for the disenfranchisement of a whole race of people. Okay? This is what I mean. When they say they let us go from slavery, they had what was called the Reconstruction. And the Reconstruction was supposed to be them helping black people better themselves. But in actuality, what happened was most black people weren't even able to leave the plantations they was on. They had to become what was called sharecroppers and work the land of their masters for a share, which was actually more BS. Okay, we can get into how they would overcharge them for everything, so they would always be in debt and never made any money. But during the same time, the United States was crying to Europe, send me your tired and humble masses, or something like that, yearning to be free. Calling for everything and everybody to come from Europe over here. Because we got all this money in the land that we're supposed to be giving these black people. But we're going to give it to y'all instead. You know what I mean? One of the reasons for the demise of the great Dr. Martin Luther King. So now back to my original statement. You know that there's a person, entity, or group that could be held directly responsible for the disenfranchisement of a whole race of people. And now you acting like you ain't did this to them. Well, now you're acting like this wasn't expected, like everything else you do. Your preparation. I'm one of those people who understands that, like, for instance, let me give you an example of some history I learned back in the day. And this is what I mean by, you knew the situation in Black America was going to get worse. This is how I know you knew this. So I know a lot of us in my community, we never heard of the Tsar Nicholas. He was like the king of Russia. Okay. And he had a family. I believe one of his daughters' name was Anastasia. You know, y'all might have heard that story about the daughter who when the family got blacked out, she was the only one who supposedly lived, and they was trying to figure out who the woman was, where she was, and they had this old white chick on this show claiming to be her back in the 90s, I believe it was. But anyway, the Tsar Nicholas. Let me show you how much these people know in advance, or how well they plot and plan. Okay, the Tsar Nicholas, what happened to him and his family was 70 years in the making. Okay, it was a hit put out on his family 70 years before what happened to his family happened. One of his earlier relatives got into beef with somebody. Okay, I don't know the names exactly because, like I said, I learned this story years ago, probably 20, 25 years ago, 30. But one of his great grand relatives or whatnot got in a beef with somebody, and they set in motion because back then they couldn't get to him. They couldn't get to the person they wanted, so they set it up in motion. They set some things up to where sooner or later they was going to be able to get to them. And even though the guy who set all this up had passed, this still happened. I'll tell you something else I learned years ago. You know how a decision is made to do something like stop food stamps or cut off EBT or link or whatever it's called? There's a room. I'm just using this as an example. There's a room or a building or place where it's a whole bunch of people in one room. And that's called a think tank, where they sit down and throw ideas at each other and play out scenarios and see how far they could take certain things. So back to my thing I said originally. There's a person, entity, or group that could be held directly responsible for the disenfranchisement of a whole group of people. But we want to act like these people just got this way. You ain't give them nothing, so they got nothing. You ain't help them with nothing, so they don't know nothing. Okay, the one or two that show higher aptitude, you put them out in front of everybody else to make it seem like we all have this capability.
That's how I'm coming.